of you will remember when Jody Balma spoke to our club after the 2022 election and her in-depth analysis of the election results. And we're really pleased to welcome you back, Jody. She's a professor of political science at Fullerton College, and she was chosen as Fullerton College Teacher of the Year in 2014 and in 2021, and was named the 2022 Orange County Community College Teacher of the Year. She specializes in American politics and California state and local government. And I particularly remember how she talked about getting students involved in local politics as one of her teaching strategies. And her goal is to help students learn how to think about politics and community problems with an emphasis on critical thinking, which is something I think we need a lot more of these days, and analysis, regardless of political party or ideology. I wanted to say ideology, but that's not appropriate. Anyway, and Senator John Newman named her as the 2021 Woman of the Year for Senate District 29. And I'd like to say she's also a contributor to many media sources, and I'm not going to list them all. They're in, I think, on the flyer. Anyway, let's welcome Jody.
Thank you very much. So for those of you who remember before, I use a lot of slides and data. I will not be offended in any way if you turn your chair to look at the presentation and just listen to me. So we're going to talk about the March 5th, 2024 election results. So the Secretary of State's office gives us lots of good data on voter turnout, and I know that this is too small to read, so I'll tell you the highlights, which is that we have 35% voter turnout, even though all 22 million registered voters got a ballot in their mail. A third bothered to vote. That is not the worst we've ever done. The worst we've ever done for a primary was in 2012 when it was 31%, but we didn't have all mail-in ballots then. We didn't have a competitive Senate race. So I'm sad, and we need to do better. So one of the really interesting races that we have up in the Bay Area is a tied result. And so for the very first time, I learned what we passed called the top two primary has a little loophole if there's a tie that 3 candidates advance. So if no one pays for a recount in the state of California, if you want to recount an election, you have to pay for it. And it's about $30,000 a day, and it could go on for 300,000 of those dollars. So you have to be pretty motivated. I was curious that it wasn't Evan Lowe or Joe Simiatin that filed for a recount. It was the guy in first place, or his former staffer who filed for a recount. But it seems like just an average voter probably wouldn't want to spend $300,000, so I'm assuming that the candidate himself or those funds will be used. We'll see what happens, but possibly we'll have 3 candidates, all Democrats, very safe Democratic seat. So no matter who actually wins, it will be a Democrat, but obviously each of those 3 would like to be the victor. So we'll see what happens. But we might only have 2 if we recount the votes. We had in the state of California, when we look at who voted, you can see that top line, and I know those numbers are super small, but the top line is the Democrats. So about half of those 22 million registered voters over on the left-hand side. We'll see if I can I don't know if I can do oh, I can. Nice. So these are all the registered Democrats, and these are the Democrats who actually turned in a ballot. These are all the NPP, and very few of them voted. And these are all the registered Republicans, and those are the Republicans that voted. And over here, you can see as a percentage of the total. So 51% of all the voters in the state of California were registered Democrats, but they make up a huge proportion of the possible registered Democrats. So Republicans in the state of California turned out to vote at higher numbers, giving them more power than they should have if all the Democrats showed up to vote. So it's interesting to compare the political power potential of the registration compared to who actually turns out. When you look at age turnout, that's the next section here. 65 is the top, all the way down to 18 to 34-year-olds. Pretty evenly distributed there in the state of California, with about a quarter in each age group. But when you look at who actually returned ballots, it is radically different. Where's my pointer? Right there. So seniors over the age of 65 turned out at 52% compared to 13% of those 18 to 34. So when you look at the percentage of the electorate, 72% of the voters were 50 or older. We have a huge problem getting young people to vote, to return ballots. So that's a challenge. Down here, because in the state of California, the ethnic demographics follow the age demographics, it's not a surprise that if older people vote, they make up a big percentage of the electorate. So you have a big percentage of the folks who returned ballots being white. Same kind of numbers, but this is specific to Orange County. Same trends, slightly different numbers. Orange County had a larger turnout than the state, but still we're only talking about 38% of voter turnout that returned ballots. Republicans, and you'll see this in some of the campaign and election results, Republicans turned out in much higher numbers in the county of Orange, and even though the Democrats hold the highest number of registered voters in the county of Orange, for those 1.8 million registered voters, there are more Democrats than any other party, but Republicans turned out at 51%, where Democrats only turned out at 38%. So there were more Republican ballots cast in the county of Orange than Democrats, and those NPP turned out at the lowest level. That can be NPP, no party preference, or registered members of the Peace and Freedom Party, registered members of any of those other minor parties, American Independent, there's a far right-wing party that captures people because of the confusion of the word independent, and others. So same here for the registration by age, 65 at the top, 18 to 34 at the bottom, and again, just incredibly anemic turnout by those young people, and very high turnout comparatively, with 62% of seniors in the county of Orange turning out. And so again, 72% of all ballots cast in the county of Orange were those 50 or over. Proposition 1, really interesting case study. Proposition 1 wants to change the previous initiative that was the Mental Health Services Act, passed, Proposition 63, passed by the voters. Because it was originally passed by voters, the only way you can change it is to ask the voters again. So this was on the ballot to expand mental health treatment, dealing with substance use challenges, and obviously the big challenge for housing for the unhoused and mentally ill. Early polling, when we called people and asked back in December 2023, 72% of the folks polled said, yeah, absolutely, I will vote for that. It seemed to be a slam dunk. That is an incredibly high percentage for polling. And then it barely eked out a win with 50% of the vote weeks later. On one day that I checked, the yes votes were only ahead by 2,000 votes. Whew. even though there was no organized opposition, even though the no on Prop 1 got a single donation of $1,000 and didn't spend it, compared to the $14 million spent by the yes on Prop 1. And it barely passed. But Governor Newsom will tell you, a win is a win, and he's spending the money. So we will see massive construction. The counties that voted no are in red. The counties that voted yes are in green. And you can see that not a lot of people live here in some of these areas, even though they get a full county. Alpine County, our smallest county in the state of California, in the nook of the state, has 1,200 people. So, significantly smaller than Los Angeles with 10 million. The presidential primary was a foregone conclusion by the time our ballots were turned in, and so Biden and Trump are the winners of the California primary for our state. The Senate primary was interesting in the campaign. Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey will advance to November and be on the ballot. This is controversial for some folks that it's not a Democrat versus Democrat race. It will be much easier for a Democrat to secure that seat without spending a lot of money. I assume that Adam Schiff will be campaigning with a lot of congressional candidates rather than spending a lot of money on his own campaign, because he will fairly easily, based on registration and turnout projections, beat Steve Garvey. The last time a Republican won a statewide office, anyone know the year? For the state of California, what year did a Republican win statewide office? 2006, Schwarzenegger. 2006, Schwarzenegger won re-election after the recall in 2003, and that's it. No Republican has won statewide election for a United States Senate, for any of the plural executive, governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, controller, board of equalization is divided by the state and is nonpartisan. So those are the realities. The Senate primary, the orange voted for Garvey and the blue voted for Adam Schiff. And then Katie Porter, Barbara Lee got 15 and 8%, 9% respectively down the ballot. The Democrats, having 3 high-profile House of Representatives members, really split the vote. And so that's why we don't have 2 Democrats on the November ballot. Registered voters in the state of California, like I said, there are 22 million registered voters. 47% are Democrats, 24% are Republicans, and 22% are NPP, no party preference. So when we talk about making projections that Adam Schiff will easily win, this is why. Because we expect that voter turnout for a presidential election will be significantly higher than for a primary, and that registration advantage will help for statewide office, and Adam Schiff is the only one on the ballot that's running statewide. It's also possible the media might write some negative things about Steve Garvey. For Orange County, it's 1.8 million registered voters. 38% are Democrats, 33% are registered Republicans, 23% are NPP, and then 6% belong to those other minor parties. So a slight advantage countywide, but again, that often is wiped out with low voter turnout for Democrats. When we look at Congressional District 45, that's Michelle Steele's seat. We had a very close race between Derek Tran and Kim Wynn Penaloza. It's been decided for Derek Wynn, but I just wanted to show you how close this was. It was only a couple hundred votes all the way to the end. So there was some question whether or not there would have to be a recount, whether or not Kim Wynn or the Orange County Democratic Party who had endorsed her was going to be willing to spend for a recount. It ended up that Kim Wynn Penaloza conceded, and so Derek Tran will take on Michelle Steele. So This is one of those situations where when we look at the registration, here are the Democrats for this district. 38% of registered voters in the district are Democrats, 32% are GOP. So there is a slight registration advantage for the Democrats. It's on the watch list for a lot of national campaigns. It's tough because Michelle Steele is the incumbent. And so that's just something to consider when you're looking at that particular race. If you look at the rest of the congressional seats, you see in the middle, in the central part of the county, that's Lou Correa, Democrat incumbent, versus David Pan, the Republican. That's a safe seat for the Democrats. This is your district, Congressional District 40, that comes all the way from north, little slice of Brea where I live, all the way down. That's Young Kim, incumbent Republican, and Joe Kerr won the Democratic primary there, so we'll challenge Young Kim. Down in South Orange County, Mike Levin, the incumbent Democrat, and this is obviously North San Diego, Matt Gunderson, the Republican challenger. And then the open seat, this is Michelle Steele that we already talked about. This Congressional 47 is also on a lot of watch lists. There were 10 candidates. It was hotly contested. 2 Democrats that were well funded battled it out. And so Scott Baugh, the Republican, won fairly easy on the Republican side. He obviously ran again against Katie Porter in 2022 and lost to her because she ran for the United States Senate. She gave up this seat. And Dave Min was victorious in that primary, and so that will be a big battle. No incumbent, and pretty close in registration, so it's a very, very competitive race. Just looking at Congressional District 46, to why I say this is a safe district, 49% Democrat registration for Lou Correa's seat and only 22% Republicans. Down here, Mike Levin's district, Democrats are 37%, Republicans are 33%. He's the incumbent, so that gives him a little bit of name recognition and fundraising advantage in that seat. Dave Min versus Scott Baugh at the top there, 36% of the district is Democrats versus 34% GOP. So that's a very competitive district, 24% NPP, and then down here, District 40 is a pretty safe Republican district, 38% registration. And again, because the voter turnout is higher for Republicans than Democrats, traditionally it becomes an even more difficult seat to take on, but Joe Kerr will try. Congressional District 22, I just want to bring your attention to this. This is one of the pickup seats that the Democrats are looking for in the state of California. It's very, very likely with the number of gerrymandered seats across the nation that the control of the House of Representatives will come down to California. And so looking at some of the seats, this is a really interesting seat. So this is the Swing Central Valley seat. 60% of registered voters are Latino. It's Kings and Tulare County, plus Bakersfield. Valadeo, who has stood up to Trump every once in a while, and it's 42% Democrat, and yet he, as an incumbent Republican, has had a really big hold on this seat. So Rudy Salas, a new challenger, rather than Christy Smith, will be taking that on. And so hoping that Rudy Salas, as a Latino Democrat, will have a better chance of defeating Valadeo. Again, it'll be a lot of campaigning and canvassing and getting the Democrats to come out and vote in that seat. Back to Orange County. This is Josh Newman. With the redistricting of 2021, Orange County only has 1 Senate seat on this cycle of the odd numbered seats. The rest of the Senate, California Senate seats in the county of Orange are on the 2022-2026 4-year cycle, and so this is the only seat. It is a new district for Josh Newman. here, this is my pointer. Most of this, about 80%, from about here down, was Dave Minn's Senate seat. It was originally drawn that 2 Democrat incumbents were going to have to face off against one another. Katie Porter deciding to run for the United States Senate opened that up. Dave Minn moved over in the musical chairs game to run for Congress and left Josh Newman alone. So he's definitely the winner in that musical chairs game because he will not have to face an incumbent Democrat. Steve Choi will not be listed as an incumbent, but he is well known in this area because he was elected to the California Assembly as a Republican. So he will not, he will be very well known in the district. And so when you look at the registration, 37% Democrats, 33% registration for Republicans, and 24% for NPP. So that will be one to watch for the Senate. When we look at the Assembly, twice as many Assembly seats in the County of Orange as the Senate, and they're all on every ballot. So it gets a little confusing to look at this geographically, but to kind of see where everything is. This is the coastal, this is the South Orange County, northern San Diego, this is off Yorba Linda, and then it veers off into San Bernardino and Chino Hills. This is just a little tiny bit of La Habra, and then over here to the rest of Los Angeles County. But if you look one-on-one, this is Sharon Quirk Silva's seat, 44% Democrats, 26% Republicans, and Sharon, all of the Assembly races have incumbents, and so they have a very good chance of winning their re-election campaigns, and a number of them are safe seats for their political party. So it would not be surprising if all of the incumbents won their seats, but we have elections, so we will see what happens. Fairly safe Democratic district for Sharon Quirk Silva. Assembly District 64, Blanca Pacheco up here, safe Democratic seat with 51% registration for Democrats. Phil Chen's district over here, very safe Republican district with 39% Republicans to only 33% Democrats. Again, incumbent advantage and higher voter turnout for Republicans. Down here, moving down to the left, Assembly District 68 is Central Orange County, Avellino, Valencia. The incumbent Democrat, 50% registration advantage for Democrats. And then Diane Dixon, a safe Republican seat for Assemblywoman Diane Dixon with 38% registration to 33% for Democrats. The rest of the seats. Tri-Ta, the incumbent here, has 33% Democrats and 37% Democrats, even though he's an incumbent Republican. And so Jimmy Fan has an opening here that he may be able to overcome that fundraising and incumbent advantage because there are more Democrats in that district. Connie Petrus Norris, who beat Steve Choi in 2022, 40% Democrats in that district to only 27% Republicans. And one of the reasons I want you to see how safe a district is, I know it gets a little in the weeds with these numbers, but I think that it's important to just reflect on the fact that all of the campaigns are going to be asking for money, for time, for campaign canvassing and volunteers. And you as a club should be aware of the numbers to canvass for those who are possible. I would not recommend spending time, energy, or money on a race that is 97% likely for a Republican to win when there are competitive seats that could, with that investment, make the difference for the control of the House of Representatives or the control of your assembly and so on. So that's why I do the numbers. So down here, I'm even getting tired of this part, but we're almost done. So Assembly District 71, Kate Sanchez is the Republican incumbent. Really safe, 40% registration for Republicans and only 28% for Democrats. Safe Republican district. Over here, Assembly District 74, for Lori Davies, the Republican, and Chris Duncan, the Democrat. This is a fairly safe, this could be a competitive race, not a safe, because there are more Democrats. 36% registration for Democrats versus 34% for the GOP. So, that's the Assembly. Back to the results of what happened. For the most part, those were all the Assembly races. 2 people were running, 2 people advanced. Now the real race is in November. For the rules for Orange County Board of Supervisors, if we're now done with the top 2 primary rules. If a Board of Supervisors candidate gets 50% or more, they win the race in the primary. In a presidential year, that's in March. In a non-presidential year, that's in June. And so Don Wagner easily beat Farrakhan. And so he was reelected in that March election for the supervisor district number 1 to replace Andrew Doe, who is termed out of office, though there are many who are calling for him to resign because of multiple instances of corruption, including the nepotism of millions of dollars that need to be investigated to a nonprofit where his 21-year-old daughter was signing contracts for millions of dollars as the president, when it turns out she wasn't. But we don't have an ethics committee in the County of Orange, and the other supervisors that voted to approve that said, I don't see a problem. Okay. To replace him, these are nonpartisan races. However, most of us know that Janet Wynn, current Republican in the state Senate, is a Republican. And most of us know Francis Marquez is a Democrat from Cyprus. So it's going to appear to the clubs, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They will endorse their member for this race. But to the voters, it will be a low information election where they don't get that information on their ballot. So Janet Wynn will face off against Francis Marquez on the November ballot. This is a district that's drawn with an advantage to the Republicans, 37%, to the Democrats, 34%. But it's a nonpartisan race, and voters aren't always going to have that information on their ballot. So it's a competitive race. We'll see what happens. Disappointing, but not surprising when you go back to what voter turnout was, that the incumbents won in the Orange County Board of Education. The 3 challengers did a really great job campaigning and getting the word out, but it just wasn't enough to combat the low information reality of these down ballot races. And so all 3 incumbents won their seats. These elections are one and done. So no matter what happens, it's over on the primary ballot. In this case, only 2 candidates were on the ballot for each of the 3 districts, so somebody would have gotten 50% or above regardless. This is also something that Dave Min introduced in the state legislature to move the timing of the Board of Education elections to November, along with the school board elections, along with the city council elections that are on the general election ballot. It hasn't gone anywhere yet, but low information elections tend to favor the incumbents, and that's what's happened. The judicial candidates on the ballot, Orange County has a huge bias to vote for whoever has the ballot designation of Orange County Deputy District Attorney, and so they did. I will remind you all, as potential voters, 76% of the courtrooms in Orange County are not criminal courts. They're civil. We are overrepresented with former prosecutors in all those civil case courtrooms. It might be good to get some judges with experience that isn't prosecuting criminals, to oversee trials of torts and constitutional questions and family law and mediation and all of those other cases that can be incredibly complicated when all you've done is prosecute criminals. But Orange County has a bias, and we just keep electing district attorneys without any more information than that. So not surprising in any way that all three of them won. And by the way, that's not to say anything negative about them as individuals. We just don't know anything about them, which is problematic as voters. So voting for somebody's job is not necessarily the best thing. So this was a recall election. The Orange Unified School District had an extremist majority that was making very, very political, polarizing, and often uninformed culture war decisions that really in just 2 years had an incredibly negative impact on Orange Unified School District. The parents, in a bipartisan fashion, got a recall committee together, walked the streets, put this petitions on the ballot, and actually voted to recall two of, one that had just recently been elected and another who was a longtime incumbent, to be removed from their seats. And so both Madison Minor and Rick Ledesma were removed, and then at a future meeting, the remaining school board members will likely, in their bylaws, they can either take applications, interview, and appoint people to serve out the rest of that term until there can be an election, or have a special election, but that's incredibly costly, and the school district would have to pay for that, and it can be incredibly costly. And then there's really low information turnout for a one and done. Huntington Beach in the news because California Attorney General Rob Bonta and California Secretary of State Shirley Weber are suing the city of Huntington Beach for Measure 1. Measure 2 also passed, which is about flags. It's against pride flags. The irony, of course, is that they've now codified that the city of Huntington Beach can fly the Olympic flag. They're expecting to get the surfing competition for the Olympics. Their actions in Measure 1 may actually have the Olympic Committee rethinking whether or not Huntington Beach deserves to be a host city. So we shall see. Stay tuned. But Measure A was to demand that voters in Huntington Beach have more opportunities to vote in person, and that they have to show voter ID. I have no idea how they will actually implement this because, of course, the city of Huntington Beach does not have election staff that is prepared to actually conduct their own municipal elections, which is the only thing they would have legal power to do for the city council races at the same time on the same day as the Registrar of Voters for the County of Orange would be conducting the rest of the elections. So incredibly complicated, but like Lee Fink said when I interviewed him for my podcast about this, he's the one representing the lawsuit against Huntington Beach, is if you spend 4 years trying to convince your base that there are stolen elections, you probably should do something when you're in control of the city council. Nobody knows how this would actually be implemented, and now the state of California is likely going to sue to prevent it from actually happening. City of Irvine passed their a citywide measure to expand the number of city council seats and also go to districts. They and Cypress are both going to district elections instead of at large. That'll avoid a costly lawsuit for them. And then the city of Westminster, which is bankrupt, voted to extend a sales tax measure to stave off bankruptcy. Races to watch in November, again, there are some House Democrats that have a better chance because Republicans won, like Michelle Steele won a seat that Biden had picked up in 2020. There are some districts that seem competitive. And so Democrats hold just 5 districts across the nation that were won by President Trump, but Republicans won 17 districts that were won by President Biden in 2020. So a little bit to the north in Los Angeles, Republican Mike Garcia facing George Whitesides. Biden won this by 12 percentage points, but the Republicans Mike Garcia won that seat by 6 in 2022. So that's gonna be a competitive race that the DCCC is gonna spend a lot of money and time on. You will likely get a text message soon if you haven't already. Republican John Duarte versus Adam Gray further up in the Central Valley. Biden won that by 11, an incredibly close, razor-thin margin for John Duarte to win that with just 0.4%. It was one of the closest races in California. Again, this was the one I talked about before, Valadeo versus Salas. Biden won it by 13, but the Republicans held on by 3%. Michelle Steele, Biden won that seat by 6. But Michelle Steele beat Jay Chen by 5 points in 2022. Young Kim is on a lot of lists. She won by a huge percentage. And so I wouldn't put it on competitive races, but the DCCC thinks it's winnable because that +1, we shall see. So that's my presentation. So.
Okay, so the first question, have you found that the no party preference people tend to vote Democratic?
So no, not necessarily. NPP tend to vote either Democratic or Republican, and it depends which reason they chose to be NPP. I'm related to and know a whole bunch of people who, born and raised in Orange County and had Ronald Reagan country posters on their walls, and their parents worked in the, aeronautical industry and can no longer belong to the Republican Party. That old quote that they didn't leave the Republican Party left them, but they're not going to be Democrats. And so it depends how they're doing it. A lot of people who are NPP lean one way or the other. And because of the election rules in the state of California, there's no real cost to being NPP, but it also means they're not getting the get out the vote information, and that shows in lower voter turnout.
Okay, what are your ideas for increasing voter turnout? What works?
So I really believe that we have to engage and inform people. I would tighten up that ballot. In November, you're gonna have a whole page of retention judges. I want them off the ballot. I would sponsor a California constitutional amendment to get rid of the plural executive. Too many elections. I don't think most people in the state of California can actually tell me the difference between a controller and a treasurer, and get it off. I want a clean ballot. When you look at countries that have mandatory voting, they vote once every 3 to 5 years, and they vote for 5 people. It's not a permanent campaign, it's not 40 things to research, and it's clear distinctions. I'd like to do that. How would I recommend getting young people to vote? We have civic education in high schools that is failing. We have to flip it. Young kids don't need to know the 3 branches of government. They need to know who's their city council. They need to know who's running their school board. Because when you think about the things that are really important to most people, local elections determine that. When you talk to me about police brutality, Congress isn't doing anything about police brutality. Who hires the police chief? The city council does. So you better pay attention to who the city council is. City council is spending more than 50% of tax dollars on public safety issues, fire and police. But the big decisions that are being made at that level also deal with land choices. So developers care about who's on the city council. So we have an affordable housing crisis. That's local decisions. That's your planning commission. Who's on most city planning commissions? Not young people who can't afford to live in the town they grew up in. Developers, realtors that want to control land use. So we have to start making those connections. If you care about curriculum, if you care about learning about ethnic studies, if you care about those issues, it's your school board that matters. The pathetic turnout for the Orange County Board of Education, those incumbents are an extremist majority selling off our public schools to private, for-profit charter schools. I'm not anti-charter, there's some great charter schools, but they're public and nonprofit. We have to start making the connections between who makes these decisions. And those elections are often decided by less than 100 people, particularly with district-based, when we carve up the city. I had my class watch on Zoom in November 2020, where the Brea Olinda School District ended in a tie. They rolled dice. Can you imagine being their neighbor and going, oh, I forgot to vote? Okay.
Okay, one more question related to voter turnout. Why do you think Republicans bring out more of their people than Democrats?
So the old saying was Democrats have to fall in love and Republicans know how to fall in line. You are not voting for a Valentine. You do not have to have a beer with the person you're voting for. You are voting for the direction the train runs. And you vote for who's on the ballot. And if you want to change it, recruit people to run next time. But you don't have to fall in love with who's on the ballot. And all too often, Democrats sit it out. Democrats hold their nose. Democrats say, oh, I'm sorry. The only thing to solve that is to get better people to run. But Republicans are better trained to vote.
Okay, changing direction. What is the comparison between mail-in and in-person voting? And I'm not sure if that is a process question or a results question.
So there's two ways to answer this. So it was kind of interesting when Donald Trump was convincing all of the Republicans that mail-in ballots were fraudulent. What we saw in California was more Republicans were going to vote centers and were not trusting either the drop boxes or mailed-in ballots. That seems to have been reduced greatly in this election, and more Republicans mailed in their ballots this time, or did the drop box. Orange County has some of the best security measures, and even the chairman of the Republican Party has admitted that. Fred Whitaker has said, at least in public meetings, that Orange County has very secure measures for ballots. And so that's kind of dissipated. But it was interesting in 2022 to see the radical difference between the votes from vote centers that were far leaning to Republican candidates compared to the Democrats who were using the mailed-in ballots. The exception, which I would love for somebody else to research because I don't have time, was that Asian American voters had more trust in the mail system and the drop box. So where you had high concentrations of Asian American Republicans, they were using the mail in 2022. I don't know what that means, but that was it. Do you think that answers the question?
Probably. Does it answer the question, whoever it was that asked?
Okay.
Okay, there are several questions about Steve Garvey versus Adam Schiff. Will Steve Garvey bring out more Republicans? Do you think this will hurt Democrats? Did Adam Schiff propping up Steve Garvey increase Republican turnouts? It's essentially the same question. I'll let you get on with it.
So yes and no. Obviously, Katie Porter is aggrieved that Adam Schiff campaigned so much. Adam Schiff spent more money than Steve Garvey had. The real loser in all of this, by the way, is poor Eric Early, who was endorsed by almost every Republican club in the state of California before baseball celebrity Steve Garvey decided to get in the race. But once Steve Garvey was there, he went to the top of public opinion polls, and so that was clearly the Republican to prop up. I don't think that I think the outcome would have been the same regardless. Steve Garvey kind of had coalesced support. Obviously, Adam Schiff's commercials calling him the most conservative Republican in the race helped Republicans identify him as the person to vote for. I don't know that it drove up voter turnout in March. If you look at past primary elections, Republicans are pretty reliable returning their ballot. What will happen in November was the second part of that question. Steve Garvey will lose, but will it drive up voter turnout for Republicans? Trump's going to do that because even though if you understand the Electoral College, the Republicans will not have enough votes in California for Trump to win, but still Trump is on the ballot, and so Republicans will turn out to vote for Trump. Steve Garvey is just a bonus to vote for the Republican there. But also understand a lot of Republicans are going to be motivated by down-ticket races that appear to be nonpartisan. They will vote for the Christian nationalists running for school board. They will vote for the Christian nationalists for their city council. They will vote for those identified Republicans in their local clubs and churches and other organizations. And so those local elections are going to be really important.
Okay, another question. Will Katie Porter run a write-in campaign?
No, she won't. Katie Porter is going to go back to teaching at UC Irvine Law School. She might get appointed if Biden wins the presidency, appointed to the Consumer Protection Bureau, might get appointed to something in the administration that takes use of her expertise and knowledge. If not, there are a whole bunch of plural executive seats in 2026 that she could run for. Treasurer, controller have declared Democrats, but clearly she could get in the race and run there. Obviously, in 2028, there will be turned out Don Wagner on the Orange County Board of Supervisors. So that would be her district. She would easily have name recognition in 2028. And I think she'll probably campaign for a lot of local candidates to engender goodwill and build up some political capital. She'll certainly have a book tour when it comes out in paperback and go on the speaker circuit where she can make a lot of money. But I think that for now she'll go back to teaching and then regroup and reload.
Okay, this is a question about the rather vicious personal attacks in CD 47. Do you think those attacks will hurt Democrats in November?
Yeah, so this is the Joanna Weiss, Dave Min slugfest for the Democratic primary. There's two schools of thought. One is that the negative campaigning inoculates Dave Min, that people in that district are tired of hearing about it. It is old news. I don't know if that's true or not. It's a theory, and we shall see. I don't think anyone will be surprised that Scott Baugh will use the same, video footage and attacks that Weiss did. But yeah, absolutely. But I would also say that Dave Min will probably resurrect the negative ads that Katie Porter ran against Scott Baugh and remind everyone of his convictions as well. So.
Okay. Why do you think young Kim has been so successful in CD40? And then a question that might be related to that is, how do the approximately 20% of voters who are no party preference, who they are and what percent would go for Trump versus Biden?
Yeah, it's hard to predict what NPP will do. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. As for Young Kim, worked for Ed Royce for a number of years, understands the districts, understands constituent services, isn't showy, isn't vile, isn't married to a former California Republican chair like Michelle Steele is. So Young Kim occasionally shows up to things. In comparison to Michelle Steele, never. showing up to things. So I also think there's more video content of Michelle Steele saying things that are unacceptable than Young Kim. Young Kim is, more careful about what she says politically. I was shocked that if I had run against her in 2022, I would have run nonstop footage of Michelle Steele as Board of Supervisors talking about the speciest attack of making dogs wear masks during COVID and just let it run. But lots of negative spending in those races, and anybody who had a mailbox in that race certainly saw it. But yeah, Young Kim just isn't nearly as... Her votes are very similar to Michelle Steele, but she just doesn't engender as much disgust. And she has a really good staff. I've got to tell you, she's got a really good staff that understands how to do constituent services, go to a lot of events. So she has a lot of goodwill that way. But that Joe Kerr's not going to win. Sorry.
What accounts for the discrepancy between the polling, I think you said in December, that Prop 1 would pass, and then the actual results?
So one thing that happened is that local county boards were against the measure. There were some concerns among locked facilities that we don't have in California. This opens the door to have facilities for mental health be locked in against people's will. That scared some people. It takes money away from local control to have statewide. I think the gathering of signatures for a recall that qualified against Gavin Newsom, I think a lot of people don't trust Gavin Newsom. And going back to the NPP, I think there are a lot of voters in California that don't feel that either party represents them. They feel that the Democrats are too far extremely liberal, and they feel that the Republicans are MAGA, and so they don't feel represented in any way. And I think that it was just a really big ticket item on the ballot. I think it's a lesson to all of the initiatives that are gathering, all the school districts that are thinking about putting bonds. A box of cereal is $7. Gas has not gone down. People see a $6 billion price tag that's going to be, $12 billion by the time we pay back a 30-year loan, and are getting. We have a $72 billion deficit in the state government. We're going to be slashing everything by November. Nothing on the ballot that spends money is likely to pass. So that's just the reality, and I think that a lot of people, and then also, Republicans voted, and they were against it.
Okay, now going to judges. Civil litigators run for judge. Does the economic status of civil litigators impact the desire to run for judgeship?
I think a lot of attorneys feel like a judge is a promotion. It's more prestigious. I think that if you spend your career in courtrooms and you see bad judges, it doesn't take very long. I mean, it takes 10 years before you can legally run. But in that 10 years of being in courtrooms, you're like, I can do a better job than this guy. And so I think that leads to people. And I think also the reality that so many civil courtrooms that these lawyers are appearing in have former prosecutors who don't know civil law makes them motivated to run. But yeah.
Actually, that brings up another question I was going to say for later, but I think it relates to what you were just saying, which is how do we improve information to combat the low information issues?
Well, so you're doing it, right? This is part of it. Coming together and gathering with like-minded voters, getting informed, having speakers that tell you things, that's a really great way to do that. So I think you should all give yourselves a round of applause, and those of you who are watching. That's how you get informed. Yeah, absolutely. And so having over 500 members that are getting information about your ballot, about candidates. You know, the League of Women Voters that I'm really active in does candidate forums so you can know who's running for city council, for school board. With the top two primary, it's really tough because you can't have a candidate forum if the incumbent won't come. And so luckily, my friend at the Voice of OC, Norberto Santana, the editor and publisher there, says we're gonna have the debates anyway. And call, and so we're gonna try to get as many organizations in Orange County together to shame, encourage, invite all of those candidates to stand in front of the voters and tell them what they wanna do. That's how democracy works. So I think that is one of the things that we can do to force candidates on the ballot to earn our vote.
Okay, this questioner asks about a couple of Senate races where there were women and the white males vote, and it seems like males tend to win over women. So why don't women vote for women?
Are there examples? I'm not sure which Senate.
I don't either.
Do you mean Adam Schiff? Are we talking about the California Senate race? I don't know who wrote it. Okay, so I'm gonna assume you're talking about why in California Adam Schiff won, unless you want to tell me another example. Okay, so one of the reasons that Adam Schiff easily got the most votes, he's really good on women's issues, and Katie Porter doesn't play well with others. And so Barbara Boxer and Nancy Pelosi both came out and said, don't vote for her. Vote for Adam Schiff, because he knows how to get things done, and he's better in the Senate. Barbara Boxer says the Senate needs to be a place where you can work cooperatively, and Adam Schiff knows how to do that. She said she wasn't going to endorse, and then she did. Katie Porter didn't have a lot of endorsements, and whether that's sexism, whether that's fair, whether that's, I don't know. I would say as a professor, I would have a really hard time playing nice with people I hated, but whatever. She and her whiteboard should be in the Smithsonian. I think she might be better served to being appointed. I think she might be better served to being an executive. I would love to see her in an executive position. You know, but I don't know. So if that's the case, I think Barbara Lee, I think, gosh, and I really wish, there's a really great movie about Shirley Chisholm, and young, super young Barbara Lee has a starring role in that movie. I wish it had come out a month earlier. It would have really helped teach people her incredible longevity. However, I think that longevity hurt her. I think 76 for a Senate position where Dianne Feinstein had been accused by the New York Times of having dementia and not stepping down. I think that hurt Barbara Lee. I think that she is not well known outside of the Bay Area. And so I think Adam Schiff having a starring role in the impeachment really helped. I think his book tour, Hours to Midnight, Close to Midnight, something about midnight. Something, Google that. I think that helped him. I think Trump denouncing him helped. And I think everybody in Congress endorsing Adam Schiff really helped. So I don't think it was necessarily sexism, although California now has no women in the United States Senate after 32 years.